They say marriages don't fall apart overnight. They unravel quietly, thread by thread, word by word, silence by silence. And sometimes it's not cheating or lies that break you. Sometimes it's the way someone stops looking at you like you're home. When I married Ethan, I thought I'd found my forever. He wasn't my first love, but he was the one I believed would last. He was steady, gentle, the kind of man who made life feel safe. We built everything together, a home, a life, a promise. But over time, I realized something no one ever warned me about. Love doesn't always leave with slammed doors or harsh goodbyes. Sometimes it stays, but fades quietly, until you're left lying beside a stranger who still wears the ring, but not the heart. I can't tell you the exact day he stopped loving me. Maybe it was a Tuesday, when I caught him staring at his phone more than my face. Maybe it was the morning he stopped kissing me before leaving for work. Or maybe it was just a slow forgetting. A love that got tired of trying. This isn't a story about betrayal in the obvious sense. There was no affair, no cruel confession. This is about the slow, painful kind. The kind that leaves you alone inside a marriage still full of words, but empty of meaning. If you've ever laid in bed next to someone who stopped reaching for you, if you've ever begged silently for affection that used to come easily, if you've ever wondered how two people can still live together and feel worlds apart, then you'll understand my story. Welcome to True Betrayal Stories, where love doesn't always end loudly. Sometimes it just fades in silence. And this is how I learned that being unseen by the one you love can hurt even more than being left. I used to believe the beginning of our story would last forever. The way he smiled when he first saw me, the way his eyes softened when I spoke about the things I loved. It felt like safety, like I had finally been chosen. Ethan wasn't loud or flashy. He was quiet in the kind of way that felt steady. When he reached for my hand, the world seemed to still. We met at a friend's wedding. I was the bridesmaid who cried too easily. He was the groomsman who caught me when I tripped on the dance floor. Everyone laughed, but the moment his hand steadied my waist, something inside me shifted. He had this calm energy that made the chaos around us disappear. That night, we talked for hours under strings of fading lights, and when he walked me to my car, he said, "I'll see you again, even if fate forgets." It sounded like something out of a movie, but he kept his word. The months that followed were soft and golden. We went on small adventures, road trips, picnics, late-night talks that stretched until dawn. He wrote me letters, the kind that felt too tender for the modern world. I saved everyone. He wasn't perfect, but he made me believe love didn't have to hurt. When he proposed, it was simple. No grand gestures, just him on one knee in our living room, with a trembling voice and a ring he'd been saving for since his first paycheck. I cried, said yes before he even finished asking. Our wedding was small, filled with laughter and people who believed in us. I remember looking into his eyes while we exchanged vows and thinking, this is what forever feels like. Our first year together was everything I dreamed marriage would be. We built a home, learned each other's routines, found comfort in the little things, burnt pancakes on Sundays, movie nights that turned into falling asleep on the couch, quiet mornings where words weren't necessary. He would trace circles on my back when I couldn't sleep, whispering promises about growing old together. I believed him. We weren't rich, but we were happy. He'd leave me sticky notes before work, small reminders like, "You make mornings worth it." I'd cook dinner waiting for the sound of his keys at the door. Every night felt like a beginning. But love, I've learned, has seasons. It blooms, it breathes, and sometimes it withers while you're still holding on. Somewhere between the routines and the responsibilities, something small began to fade. The laughter came less easily. The touches became less frequent. The silences stretched longer. I told myself it was normal. That marriage changed, that comfort replaced excitement, that quiet was just another word for stability. I kept convincing myself that this was still love, even when I felt a loneliness I couldn't explain. I remember one evening in particular. I made his favorite dinner, chicken Alfredo, candles lit, soft music playing. He came home late, distracted, scrolling through his phone. I smiled, trying to pull him back into our moment, but he barely looked up. He said he was tired. We ate in silence. It was the first time I felt invisible sitting right in front of him. After dinner, he kissed my forehead instead of my lips and went straight to bed. I stood there, staring at our empty plates, feeling something hollow open inside me. That night, I realized the distance between us wasn't measured in miles. It was in the absence of effort. Still, I kept trying. I planned small surprises, wrote him notes, bought him gifts. Each time he smiled politely, as though I were a guest in his life, not his partner. But love makes you stubborn. You tell yourself it's just a phase. You hold on tighter, hoping the warmth will return if you don't let go. Looking back, I think that's when the unraveling began. Not with a fight, not with harsh words, but with indifference. With the quiet erosion of something once sacred. He still said he loved me, and maybe he even believed it. But sometimes I love you becomes a habit, not a truth. And I didn't know it then, but I was already mourning a marriage that hadn't ended yet. I used to think distance was measured by how far apart two people stood, but I learned that the cruelest kind of distance can exist even when you're inches away. It began slowly, so slowly I almost missed it. Ethan started leaving earlier for work, coming home later, his explanations vague and practiced. Deadlines, he'd say, meetings ran long. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, because believing meant safety. Because the alternative meant something was breaking. At first, I brushed it off. We were just adjusting, I told myself. Marriage wasn't always sunshine. People got busy. Life got heavy. But soon, the small things that once made us us started disappearing. He stopped texting me during the day. He stopped asking how I slept, or if I'd eaten. He stopped noticing the little things. The way I changed my hair, the new scent I wore, the silence I filled just to keep us from feeling like strangers. Our home began to echo. The laughter that once filled it turned to quiet routines. We still spoke, but our words became functional, about bills, groceries, errands. We stopped talking to each other and started talking around each other. I remember one evening when I sat across from him at dinner. He was scrolling through his phone, the blue light painting his face in a glow that made him look like someone else. I said his name softly, trying to pull him back. He looked up, smiled briefly, and said, "What's wrong?" Nothing. That was the problem. Nothing was wrong, and yet everything was. The next morning, I found one of his old notes in a drawer. "You make mornings worth it." The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded. I ran my thumb over the words, feeling like they belonged to someone else's life, a version of us that had been quietly buried beneath routine. Nights were the hardest. We used to talk until we fell asleep, whispering dreams and plans. Now the silence between us was louder than any argument. He'd turn his back to me in bed, scrolling endlessly, while I lay there pretending not to notice. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how love could exist in the same room as loneliness. There were moments when I wanted to scream, ask him what happened, why he stopped reaching for me, why I felt more like furniture than a wife. But the fear of pushing him further away kept me quiet. I told myself, maybe tomorrow he'll notice me again. One night I did ask. My voice trembled when I said, "Ethan, do you still love me?" He looked at me for a long time, too long, and finally said, "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" His tone wasn't angry. It was detached, like I had asked him if he'd remembered to lock the door. He didn't see the tears that followed, or maybe he did and chose to ignore them. That's when I understood. Sometimes love doesn't die, it just stops showing up. Days turned into weeks, and I began to fade too. I stopped trying to fix what he wouldn't acknowledge. I stopped cooking his favorite meals, stopped leaving little notes on his desk. I matched his silence, thinking maybe he'd feel the emptiness and miss what we had. But he didn't. He seemed almost relieved. One afternoon, I caught him sitting on the porch, staring at his phone again. I asked, "Who are you always talking to?" He hesitated, then said, "Just work." His voice cracked on the word work. I wanted to believe him so badly, but something in my chest whispered, "He's already gone." That night, when I kissed him goodnight, he didn't kiss me back. He just said goodnight like it was a courtesy. I lay there, staring at his back, realizing how much it hurt to be beside someone who made you feel alone. The next morning, I woke up before him. I sat at the edge of the bed and looked at the man I once thought I couldn't live without. He looked peaceful, but distant, like someone who had already left me in his heart. I didn't cry that morning. I just sat there, feeling the weight of something invisible pressing down on me, the kind of ache that doesn't scream, it just lingers. And in that stillness, I realized the truth. Ethan hadn't left me yet. but emotionally, he'd been gone for a long time. I think the heart knows when it's being abandoned. It just takes the mind a little longer to catch up. I kept trying to convince myself that things were just off, that marriage had seasons, that this was just one of them. But deep down, I knew. I could feel the coldness spreading like frost between us. Every time I tried to reach for him, it felt like pressing my hand against glass. He was there, but untouchable. The small moments that used to fill me with warmth became reminders of everything we'd lost. I'd catch myself setting 2 plates for dinner, even though he'd already texted to say he was working late again. The sound of his key in the lock used to make my heart skip. Now it just made me brace myself for more silence. I remember one night in particular. It was raining hard, and I'd cooked his favorite meal again, stupidly hoping maybe food could fill the space his affection no longer did. When he walked in, drenched and tired, I smiled and said, "I made dinner." He looked at me blankly, glanced at the table and said, "I already ate." Then he walked past me. Just like that, no apology, no awareness of the hurt he'd left behind. I sat down at that table and ate alone, staring at the candle flickering weakly between 2 empty chairs. And that's when I broke, not loudly, not with screams or thrown plates. I just cried quietly, because that's how emotional abandonment destroys you. Slowly, silently, until you start believing you're unworthy of being seen. The next morning I told him, "I feel like I'm losing you." He didn't argue, he didn't reach for me. He just sighed and said, "I don't know what you want me to say." That's the thing about emotional betrayal. It doesn't come with lies or secrets. It comes with nothing, with indifference, with the absence of care. That day I stopped pretending. I stopped asking where he was going or when he'd be home. I stopped waiting for him to remember the woman he promised to love. It's strange how freeing and devastating it feels to stop hoping. But even in the silence, I still loved him. That's the cruelest part. Loving someone who's already gone but still standing in front of you. One night as I lay in bed, I scrolled through old photos of us. Our wedding, our vacations, our smiles. We looked happy, we looked whole. I realized those moments weren't lies. They were just gone. I whispered to myself, "I miss us." And the words felt like goodbye. Days passed, then weeks. The distance between us wasn't invisible anymore. It was tangible. He started sleeping on the edge of the bed. We stopped touching, stopped talking, stopped being. I'd wake up and look at him, wondering when love had turned into coexistence. I knew something had to change. Either he'd find his way back or I'd have to find my way out. And that brings me to you, the one listening right now. If you've ever felt this kind of emptiness, if you've ever begged for connection that never came, if you've ever wondered how it's possible to be so lonely beside someone who once made you feel alive, then I want you to pause. Take a breath. You're not alone. Too many people think betrayal is only about cheating, but it's not. It's about withholding. Withholding love, affection, honesty, attention. It's when someone stops showing up for you but expects you to keep showing up for them. So before we move deeper into this story, before I tell you what happened the day everything finally shattered, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever stayed too long in a love that forgot how to see you? If you have, stay with me, because the next part isn't about breaking. It's about realizing that sometimes the only way to survive is to let go of what's already gone. There wasn't one single moment when I decided I couldn't do it anymore. It was the slow accumulation of 1,000 small heartbreaks. The sound of him turning away in bed, the quiet dinners, the laughter that used to echo in our house now replaced by the hum of the refrigerator. Love didn't leave with a bang. It eroded, grain by grain, until there was nothing left to hold on to. I started sleeping on my side of the bed, turned away from him, because facing his silence hurt more than pretending to sleep. The scent of him used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me of the man he used to be. One morning, I made coffee for 2 out of habit. He came into the kitchen, took his mug without a word, and sat across from me. I wanted to ask him why we were still doing this, why we were pretending that sharing a table meant sharing a life. But instead I said nothing, because by then, silence had become our language. He started spending more time at work, though I stopped asking what that meant. Maybe he was alone, maybe he wasn't. I don't think it mattered anymore. What broke me wasn't the possibility of another woman. It was the certainty that he no longer cared if I wondered. One night, I finally asked, "Do you even want to be here anymore?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at his hands, then said softly, "I don't know." 3 words. That's all it took to end everything I'd built my world around. I remember staring at him, searching for some sign of regret, some flicker of the man who once promised me forever. But his eyes were calm, almost relieved. And that's when I realized I wasn't losing him. I had already lost him long before that moment. After he went to bed, I stayed up. I walked through our house, touching the memories we'd built together. The pictures on the walls, the mug with our initials, the dried bouquet from our wedding day. Everything felt like a ghost. Familiar, but no longer alive. The next day I packed a small bag. Not everything, just enough to leave for a while. I told him I needed space, but really, I needed to see who I was without him. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask where I was going. He just nodded. That nod broke me more than any argument ever could. Because silence can be louder than screams when it comes from someone who used to fight for you. I drove to my sister's house that night. The rain followed me the whole way, blurring the road and the tears on my face until I couldn't tell the difference. When I arrived, I sat in the car for nearly an hour before going inside. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror and whispered, "You did everything you could." It felt like the first truth I'd spoken in months. Inside, my sister held me without asking a single question. I cried until my body ached. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be strong or composed. I was just a woman who had been loved halfway and left silently. The following days were quiet, but in a different way. It was a healing kind of quiet, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. I missed him, but not the version of him who had stopped loving me. I missed who we used to be, and I began to accept that version no longer existed. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for my phone, wanting to text him something small, something meaningless just to feel connected. But I stopped myself every time, because I realized I wasn't looking for him. I was looking for closure. And closure doesn't always come from them. Sometimes it comes from finally choosing yourself. Love shouldn't make you feel invisible. Marriage shouldn't feel like mourning someone who's still alive. And walking away shouldn't feel like failure when staying would have destroyed what's left of you. So I let him go. Not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to fix something that refuses to grow. It's strange how silence, the same silence that once suffocated me, became the very thing that started to heal me. At first it was unbearable. The absence of his voice, his footsteps, even the sound of the coffee maker he used every morning. It all reminded me of what was gone. But then, slowly, I began to realize that the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. The first week after I left, I slept more than I had in months. My sister would check on me, making sure I ate, reminding me to breathe. Healing didn't come in big moments. It came in tiny, fragile ones. Making myself tea, opening the curtains, taking walks without checking my phone. It was like learning how to live again after forgetting. For the first time, I started to notice the world outside my pain. The way the morning light crept through the blinds, the sound of birds instead of arguments, the feeling of breathing without holding it in, waiting for the next emotional blow. I had been so used to surviving that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply exist. One afternoon, I found a journal at the bottom of my suitcase. It had been a wedding gift. A new beginnings book, we'd called it. I opened it to the first page and saw Ethan's handwriting. "For every chapter we write together." My heart ached, but I didn't close it. Instead, I turned the page and started writing my own words. My own story, not as a wife, not as a half, but as me. Every day I wrote a little more. Some days I wrote about the pain. Other days, about the small victories. Laughing again, making breakfast without crying, walking past couples holding hands without bitterness. Healing didn't look pretty. It wasn't linear. Some days I still missed him. Some nights I still reached for his side of the bed in my sleep. But I started forgiving myself for that too. I began therapy, something I used to think I didn't need. My therapist asked me one question that changed everything. When was the last time you felt loved by yourself? I didn't have an answer. That silence hit harder than any memory of Ethan ever could. So I started learning how to love myself in the ways I had begged him to love me. I took myself to lunch. I bought flowers just because I liked them. I filled my days with small rituals that reminded me I was still here. Still worthy, still whole, even if someone else failed to see it. Weeks turned into months, and with each sunrise, the weight on my chest grew lighter. I stopped checking my phone for his messages. I stopped replaying our last conversation in my head. I realized that closure wasn't something he could give me. It was something I had to build with acceptance. One day, I went back to the house, not to move back in, but to say goodbye properly. It was exactly as I'd left it, clean, quiet, almost hollow. I walked through each room, touching the walls like they were old friends. The kitchen where we once danced, the couch where we planned our future, the bedroom that had turned into a place of silence. I stood in the doorway and whispered, "Thank you, for the love, for the lessons, and even for the loss." It wasn't forgiveness for him, it was release for me. Leaving that house didn't feel like running away anymore. It felt like walking toward something new. My heart still carried scars, but they didn't ache the same way. They were reminders of how much I'd endured and survived. Now I wake up each morning with gratitude instead of grief. I still believe in love, but not the kind that demands you shrink to be seen. I believe in the love that starts from within. The kind that never abandons you when others do. And maybe one day, I'll love again. But this time, it'll be different. This time, I'll make sure I never lose myself trying to keep someone else. Because the truth is, the greatest healing doesn't come from being loved again. It comes from realizing you were enough all along. It's been a year since I left. A year since I packed my life into boxes and drove away from the house where my love slowly died. I thought time would erase the memories, but it didn't. It transformed them. The pain is still there, but softer now. Like an old wound that only aches when it rains. People say time heals everything. That's not true. Time doesn't heal, you do. Healing is a choice you make every day, to stop reopening old wounds just to check if they still hurt. It's waking up one morning and deciding that peace is more important than closure. The woman I was back then, the one who begged for affection, who stayed hoping love would come back, she doesn't exist anymore. I mourned her too, but in her place, someone new was born. Someone who knows that love without effort isn't love. Someone who knows that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I used to define myself by what I'd lost. Now I define myself by what I found. Strength, clarity, stillness. The ability to be alone without feeling lonely. There's a quiet power in solitude. A power I never understood until I sat with my own company and realized I liked who I was becoming. One evening, I went for a walk through the park near my new apartment. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold. Couples passed by, laughing, holding hands. A year ago, that sight would have broken me. But that day, I just smiled. Because I wasn't jealous anymore. I was hopeful. Hopeful that love can exist again. Not in the way it did before, but in a healthier, softer form. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone's actions. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of them. So yes, I forgave Ethan. Not because he asked for it, but because I needed it. Carrying anger felt heavier than carrying loss. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant letting go of the version of him I kept trying to fix in my memory. One day he did reach out, a simple message. "I hope you're doing okay." I stared at it for a long time. There was a time when I would have written back paragraphs, searching for meaning in every word. But I didn't reply, not out of bitterness, but peace. Some chapters deserve to end without an epilogue. Now my days are filled with quiet joy, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone else. I've started painting again, something I stopped years ago because life got too busy. My art isn't perfect, but it's mine. Each stroke feels like reclaiming a part of myself I lost, while loving someone who couldn't see me. Sometimes I still think about him, not the man he became, but the man he was when we were happy. And I smile, because even though it ended painfully, it began beautifully. And I've made peace with both truths. If you're listening to this, and you're still in that place, the one where it hurts to breathe, where you're scared to start over, please remember this. You will heal. Not all at once, not easily, but you will. And when you do, you'll realize that heartbreak doesn't destroy you, it reshapes you. One day, you'll wake up and the pain will no longer feel like home. You'll see yourself in the mirror and recognize your reflection again. You'll stop looking for validation in others because you'll finally find it in yourself. And when that day comes, you'll understand what I mean when I say, the end of love isn't the end of you. It's the beginning of your rebirth. So here's to every woman who stayed too long, who loved too deeply, who gave too much, May you learn that your softness is not your weakness. It's your power. Because the truth is, we don't survive betrayal by forgetting it. We survive it by forgiving ourselves for staying, and by loving ourselves enough to never settle again. And maybe one day, when I fall in love again, it won't be because I need to be saved. It'll be because I'm already whole. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Truly, because telling it wasn't easy. Reliving it meant walking back through rooms I swore I'd never enter again. Feeling emotions I'd buried deep under the promise of strength. But I've learned something. Strength isn't the absence of pain. It's choosing to stand up while it still hurts. This wasn't just a story about love and betrayal. It was about rediscovery, about the quiet kind of healing that doesn't come wrapped in grand moments, but in the small sacred ones. Breathing without fear, smiling without pretending, loving yourself without conditions. To every woman who's ever felt unseen inside her own marriage, who's ever begged for attention that used to come effortlessly, who's ever mistaken emotional neglect for normalcy, you are not crazy. You were starving for love in a place that refused to feed you, and that's not your fault. When I finally walked away, I thought I was losing everything. But in reality, I was just coming home, to myself. I learned that peace is not found in fixing what's broken, but in accepting that not everything is meant to be repaired. Now, my heart beats differently. It doesn't rush toward the wrong people anymore. It waits patiently for something kind, something steady, something that doesn't ask me to lose myself just to be loved. And to you listening right now, if you're still holding on to someone who's already let go, this is your sign to release it. Let it go. You don't have to beg to be chosen. You don't have to shrink to be seen. You are already enough, even in your solitude. This is True Betrayal Stories, where every scar becomes a sentence, and every story becomes a mirror for someone still trying to heal. If this story touched you, thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling it with me. Thank you for believing that heartbreak doesn't define you. It refines you. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you want more real, raw, emotional journeys like this one. And in the comments, share your story. You never know who might need to read it tonight. Because healing starts when we stop hiding our pain and start turning it into purpose. And this was mine.